Aloha, Paul here at the WarHQ. I'm going to do a little video on dice etiquette and hopefully this will grow through time. But it's come about from some discussions myself and Harrison have had on the War Room show, and sitting down and we've had a lot of comments back about what annoys people when they're playing games of bolt action. And when we sat down and thought about it and we were thinking about it from our opponent's point of view, I do quite a lot of things that are perhaps a bad habit or needlessly make life more difficult for my opponent. And in bolt action, what I want to do is give my opponent a really good time and a really good game. So if I can cut as many of these out as possible, fair enough, you won't agree with all of these. You might think of some new ones, and if you do, add them to this video or contact us. But here's some guidelines. These are not meant to be rules. They're meant to be guidelines. So when you're buying your next sets of dice, you might think about what you do with them. So, first of all, various dice. This is my little dice box that I have. It's a nice little kit. If anybody's interested in it, I'll post up a link. But it holds all my dice in it. It's got my dice bag. It's got my template. I carry about a 45-degree template, so for working out arcs of fire on mortars and artillery and things. And this is the dice box that I have as I have changed them out. So the first thing that I have are these, if that will focus on them, and these are my club dice, and you'll see on my club dice I've got my logo. And on this dice, it is, if I can find the number 1, my logo is on the 6. But some club dice, and I'm not pointing out this club in particular, I was given this very nicely at a competition I went to. Some club dice, am I holding that round the right way? I think I am. Some club dice have their logo on the number 6, on the number 1, as this dice does. So sometimes when you're playing and you're playing with logos, people don't, when those logos turn up, I can't get any to go now, you don't always immediately realise what number it is, whether it's a 1 or a 6, because I play with these ones which it's on the 6. Whenever the guys were using these dice at the club, I suddenly thought, brilliant, a 6, he's failed an order test, and of course he didn't. And whilst it didn't bug me, it kind of brought it home that maybe we're better playing with D6s. Just straightforward without club logos, and perhaps I'll keep these for giving as little keepsakes to people rather than playing with them. The other thing, and this isn't a great example of it, but the other thing is when you play with multicoloured dice like this one is quite clear as it happens, but quite often the dots are not very clear, and when people roll them you can't easily see what number's coming up. So I would suggest that for ease of use, perhaps both for yourself, but particularly for your opponent, using dice where the dots are clearly visible, contrasting colours, will make it much easier for your opponent and yourself to see what's been rolled. And as the dots start to wear off, I think the dot on that one is starting to go for some reason, or there's a bit of dirt, you want to just refill them in from time to time and keep your dice maintained. So in here I've got a set of black dice, a set of red dice, a set of white dice, just small numbers, so I can, if I want to roll multiple dice for different things, we can distinguish between them. And they should all be fairly clear exactly, excuse me, should be fairly clear exactly what the numbers are on them. So that was the first thing with dice, as I would suggest next time you're purchasing dice, or if you can change them out to D6s with dots on all sides, no logos if possible, and have clearly contrasting dots so they're easily seen from a distance so people can see them. So that was the first point on dice. The next thing I think about dice is quite often when I'm playing an opponent, he has the habit of chucking his dice right the way across the table. And I find this is one of the things that slightly irritates me. So what I have, as you can see, I have a dice tray which I will roll the dice into, so in theory at least, they shouldn't go all over the place. It's not always possible to use a dice tray, but where you can, it keeps them all together, keeps them facing. If you don't want a dice tray, a sandwich box for a couple of quid, or even an old takeaway tub that you washed out, so it costs you nothing, will do exactly the same thing. Keeps your dice together, gives you a container that you can take your dice in, keep them all in the one place. So I find that quite useful. Another thing I do is I know the numbers of dice that I have. So these red dice here, I know that there are, he says, forgetting the number of dice that I knew they were there. There's 20 of this type of dice. So I know that if I'm rolling, say, for a Stuart tank that has 20 shots, I can just take out all those red dice. I don't need to count them, nice and quick. And I know exactly how many there are. So if I was rolling for a Stuart, don't need to count them. I just need to take all the dice of this type. I know how many there are. And I can just roll them straight away. So that just helps to speed things up a little bit. It's make things easier for yourself. The black dice, I know there are 25 of them. And the little white dice I've got, although one's hiding over there, there should be 7 of them. So I just know exactly the numbers of my dice. So it just makes it a little bit easier for me. Now, the other thing with rolling dice, sometimes people will use their hand to stop the dice going across the table, which is lovely, but sometimes your opponent might think that by dragging your hand you're changing the dice, especially if he's watching from that side. He can't see what you're doing with the hand. So I would suggest you don't do that. That's one of Harrison's habits, and he did it simply so that the dice didn't roll all over the table. But there is always that niggle. If your opponent, you won't be doing it, I know, but there is that chance your opponent might think you are. So again, another great reason for using a wee dice box. Now, when you're taking, if we're rolling for hits, and say that we were on this particular dice roll, all the ones that were, ones is the wrong word, all the dice, so we're clear, that are hitting on a 4 or above. Now, some people will take the ones that have hit out. Now, the danger with doing this is once they've been picked up, if your opponent says, oh no, that was a 3 you picked up, you've now got no way of showing it was a 3. And so it's not going to happen very often, but there's a possible chance there that that's going to cause a little dispute or an upset in the game. Far better, I've just dropped one on the floor. What you do is, if this was the same roll, just re-rolled, instead of taking the hits out, take your misses out and leave the hits. And that way, if there can be no discussion or doubt about what are hits or misses, and no misunderstandings. And then you can show your opponent, look, I've got 6 hits that time, I'm going to roll, he agrees, I'm going to roll for kills, and let's just say that had been veteran troops you were firing at. You can say, I've got 1 kill, I've taken away the ones that didn't kill. So again, there can be no doubt. So take your misses away, don't take your hits away, would be my suggestion. And that's more or less most on the numbered dice. Something that occurred to me with order dice is that the bolt action order dice aren't always very easy to see. And quite often I have a hard time finding the right side of the dice with the order. And in the past I've always been tempted just to put the dice down on any side and not really concentrate. But I think for the ease of both yourself and the other player, you should make the effort to find the right side of the dice. A lot of you guys do this, I know you do, and I'm in a bad habit of not doing it. So I think you should find the right side and put it down. It's more in keeping with, more important for units that are down or units that are in ambush, because which side that dice up is fairly important. And then again, it's a possible place where somebody might dispute. You say, oh, they're down, and he says, ah, but the dice isn't down, I can't remember. You know, the dice is saying fire because you haven't looked. Or the opposite way can happen. You might just put the dice down and say, ah, but that wasn't the order you gave them, and there's confusion there. Far better if you just use the dice as it was intended. Put it to the right order. Just take that wee bit extra time. And I am going to try my best to make these dice stand out more, the orders on the dice, by using contrasting paint colours to fill in the white on this grey. It hasn't got much contrast. I'm not too sure what would be better on the grey. Maybe black would be better. These red dice aren't quite so bad, but again, I don't like them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure I contrast my order dice, and I'm going to make sure that I put them to the right order. And another thing that I sometimes do, this is my habit, I don't know if any of you others have it, is once I've placed all my dice out, and let's say your opponent still has 1 or 2 dice in the bag, I will tend quite badly and wrongly to start going around and taking up my dice before my opponent has finished the go. No longer will I do that. It could again cause unnecessary hassle or upset. If I say, oh, my lot were down, he says, well, you've taken up the dice. Quite rightly, you know. So that's another habit I will stop from now on, and I would suggest that you guys follow suit. The other dice I have in my box, I've got a large crap dice from one of the, that's from the Sands Regency Casino. I use that as my turn marker. Also, at the start of the game, I'll roll that to decide who's attacker, defender, that sort of thing. I have several different coloured dice which are multi-sided. These are the ones that I use. Say if I'm using a mortar and the mortar misses, I'll put the 5 down beside my mortar, and if it's required and I can find it, I'll put the 5 down beside the unit that it's attempted to hit. So the next turn, assuming that unit hasn't moved, etc., I know which unit I'm attacking. I haven't forgotten if there's a lot going on. So that's what I use those dice for. I use these ones for random direction occasionally. More often than not, I use them to mark the unit that's been targeted, or to mark the spot where an airstrike's coming in. And I actually carry a D3 dice. Not that I ever remember to use it, but for those D3 rolls, sometimes I'll use that dice. And I'm not quite sure why that single one there has sneaked in, but it's in there. So that's my dice. Now, the other thing while we're on the etiquette is pin markers. Now, one of the things that annoys me slightly, it doesn't detract too much for the game, is people that use the dial markers, pin markers. They're really very nice, and I do love them. They're very colourful, but the numbers on them are really small. And when you're looking across the table, I find myself continually asking the other guy how many pins are on his units. And it just for me, it detracts from the game, so I'm assuming it detracts for others. Even though they're really nice markers, what I used to use was a D6, which is, these used to be my pin markers actually. I used to use this as a D6, so you could clearly see, and because they were different dice, I didn't get them confused. People could clearly see how many pins were on a unit. They didn't need to ask me, because sometimes how many pins on a unit does determine what action you're possibly going to take. So I would suggest using different coloured D6, or using tokens. Sometimes people use coloured stones or various things, or I've got these tokens that I've started using now, and if you put them beside the unit, yeah, they're slightly big, not quite as neat, but people can see quickly and easily how many pins are on a unit. And I think that's probably all I have to say to now. This has gone on much longer than I thought, but I'd be curious to hear any of your comments, any of your suggestions. And as I say, this is not meant to be a criticism of anybody. It's just meant to try and enhance the game for your opponent. is all that I have in mind here. So guys, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.